let's just pull up that graphic right there. And that is the current matchups. If the season ended today, if we had conference championships this weekend, what a slate we would have. We'd have Texas and A&M, Oregon, Penn State, Clemson, Miami, and BYU, Iowa State. That's the most hilarious possible combination, I feel like, in the Big 12. But Mitch, I guess let's start in the SEC, because I feel like after Saturday, and really over the last couple of weeks, we've just been left wondering who, if any, are the elite teams. And I hate using that phrasing. I was open about that a couple weeks ago on the live show, but it really is a fair question to ask of who really wants this conference championship, who really wants to make a trip to Atlanta other than Texas. It doesn't look like a lot of teams are really out there trying to take it.
Yeah, there's not many complete teams this year. I feel like there really are three. I think Texas, Oregon, and Ohio State are probably the closest thing that we've gotten to a complete team. And, I have concerns about quarterback at Ohio State. So maybe they're not even a fully complete team. We broke that game down, and, Will Howard played well. But the lack of kind of situational awareness on that final drive, it is something that gives me concern for Ohio State going forward. But beyond those three, there are a bunch of good teams in college football, but I don't think that there's any world beaters, right? Georgia looks very mortal. Alabama is beyond mortal. I mean, Trey, Alabama might be kind of bad. I think their defense straight up is bad at football this year. They're
I don't think
undisciplined.
Alabama's bad. I think they're too talented to be bad, but they definitely, we saw this last year and in the waning years of the Nick Saban era, they just lack that edge that they've had for so long that really set them over the top. They were always the most talented team, and they're still more talented than 99% of the teams they take the field against. But they just don't have that edge that takes them over the top and makes them an unbeatable juggernaut most of the time.
It feels like they're lacking that killer instinct that would make them a Nick Saban Alabama team, right? And that's an uncomfortable place to be if you're an Alabama fan. You haven't had to deal with that in a number of years. I think Clemson is a team that is on the cusp of being one of those top echelon teams. I still am nervous based on the fact that Georgia beat the doors off of them, and now all of a sudden it doesn't feel like Georgia's all that elite. So, does Clemson have a big game problem? Was it just week one? I think we'll start to figure some of that out as we get through the rest of the season, and obviously the ACC championship game, because it feels like Clemson might just get to cakewalk there. Miami, do you trust Miami even to win this week at Louisville? I know there's a lot of people picking the Cards to win that game. So, and then, yes, of course, Garrett in the chat letting us know BYU is good. I still have my questions about that offense. When you look at what BYU has done well this year, it's on the defensive side. And in those avalanches, those momentum mudslides, if you will, that have carried the Cougars to some of these blowout victories, it starts on the defensive side of the ball. I want to see what happens if BYU doesn't have a game-changing play on defense and Jake Retzlaff and that offense, LJ Martin, have to carry the load. Not saying they can't do it. I'm just saying I don't know that we've seen BYU do it, BYU's offense do it, fully on their own merit. But it is a fascinating discussion. I didn't even mention Army and Navy, which, hello, salute the troops. We could have an all-time college football headache situation here at the end of the year. It's a fun slate as we turn the page to the second half of the year. And I think that for all the complaining and griping that I see on Twitter about there's not an elite team this year, who cares, man? This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And the parity is back in college football. Be that because of the coaches we lost, be that because of the transfer portal, NIL. It's probably a combination of all of those things and more. But I just love what we're seeing. A couple nuggets for you on the last weekend, Mitch. Going into the week, 71% of Saturday's games had a single-digit spread. Hat tip to the Solid Verbal and Ty Hildebrandt, friend of the show, for that one. And then it delivered 28 out of 44 games were decided by 10 points or less. Everywhere you looked, there was a close game. I feel like we're going to see that all season long down the stretch here. Going through a couple more of these conferences just in depth. So I have the odds pulled up here. Want to go through just the top odds. A&M and Texas, it would be the matchup today. Texas, Georgia, and Bama are kind of the three favorites. So Texas is basically a lock to make the SEC championship at this point, barring something really unforeseen happening. You've got A&M at plus 700, but Georgia and Bama are at plus 450 to win the SEC. Then in the Big Ten, it's really a three-team race at this point. Oregon, Penn State, and Ohio State. Maybe Bama isn't in the championship. Honestly, like right now, I wouldn't put them in the championship conversation. No. They are really struggling and need to get back on the right footing before we even talk about that. And their schedule is about to beef back up. So in the Big Ten, though, it does feel like a three-team race. I'd be really surprised. Indiana's still undefeated, obviously. My Hoosiers are holding strong at 6-0, but it really will be two of the three of Oregon, Penn State, and Ohio State. And maybe the one that's the odd man out there doesn't complain about that too much because they don't have to play an extra game in Indianapolis, and they're probably hosting a first-round playoff game anyways. ACC looks like a two-man race, but I do want to point out what Hunter said in the comments. Let me scroll back up and find it. We're not sleeping on SMU. Believe you me, my friend. We are not sleeping on SMU. But yeah, this is just what the matchup would be if the game was this weekend. Mm-hmm. Obviously, a lot of tiebreakers still to be worked out, and SMU doesn't play Clemson or Miami in the regular season, so they have an inside track to having a record that might warrant them being in that ACC title game conversation. But we are not sleeping on SMU. We are fully back in. I think I can speak for all three of us that we're all fully back in on the pony bandwagon after a little bit of bumps in the road before we knew how good BYU was.
And I think Hunter and the boys at the Mustang Mood have got to be fired up because Kevin Jennings, I doubted it. I really thought Preston Stone was the better of the two quarterbacks. Honestly, he still may be the better of the two quarterbacks, but they found a way for Kevin Jennings to pilot this offense, and they've looked really good. The defense has stepped up and continued to step up. I think the Ponies are beyond dangerous going forward. That game against Pitt for homecoming will be an interesting one, no doubt. But the rest of this SMU schedule, it's why so many people believe that SMU could be an ACC dark horse in the first place. This schedule is one of the easier ones in the conference, especially once Florida State fell off. They decimated TCU. You start to see the path to a conference championship dream at the very least. And if Miami's able to slip up this week at Louisville, if Clemson drops one late, who knows? We still got landmines out there. If we have learned anything from this season, it's that there is no sure win on your schedule for the next week, right? You have to take it one game at a time. Otherwise, you're liable to slip up and fall prey to the 2007 vibes that we've got going on.
Yeah, there's a lot of 2007 vibes in here right now. And yeah, in the ACC, it looks like a two-horse race just because of how talented Clemson and Miami look on paper, but SMU could really be right there in that conversation down the stretch. Again, don't play either Clemson or Miami. The home road splits are great too. It's going to be absolutely fun to watch that conference race play out. And the worst case is they're going to get a really solid bowl game and set the foundation for the future and be right there in the future of the ACC. I do want to talk about the Big 12 a little bit before we move on to some late night recaps because the Big 12 is already drunk. And I just want to remind everybody that one of these teams will be the 4 seed, most likely, maybe even the 3 seed if it breaks right in the playoffs. Our Big 12 odds right now, Iowa State is the odds-on favorite at plus 175, and BYU, the only other undefeated team in the conference, is at plus 500. So even the odds makers a little less in on BYU, maybe waiting for that other shoe to drop, maybe waiting for a little bit of the luck to run out. After that, you've got Kansas State at plus 325. We'll talk about the Wildcats here in just a second. Texas Tech at plus 1,000, still undefeated in the Big 12. Big game with Baylor this week. Probably still going to be undefeated after this week with Baylor at home. And then you've got some other teams that are really searching and need a lot of help after that. Arizona State and Utah at plus 1,500. Colorado at plus 1,600. And West Virginia. West Virginia might be the most polarizing team because I don't think they're bad. And I think we wrote them off pretty early, but they're 3-3, and the combined record of the three teams they lost to is 18-0.
Yeah, I think they've just lost to some better teams. I think it's truly as simple as that. I know that that fan base is in hell right now because my gosh, they find ways to keep games close, but they're just not past they're just not over the hump yet of winning those games, right? And we talked about in the preseason some of the breaks that they got last year. It feels like Occam's razor has swung back the other way a little bit. I am also very interested to see what happens with Cincinnati and with Texas Tech. Texas Tech, for example, Trey, 236 points for 194 points against. They are living on a wing and a prayer
All
right
three
now.
of they're 3-0 in conference, and all three of them were single digit wins, right?
Yep.
I don't have their schedule in front of me, but that feels right.
And credit to them going on the road to Tucson and winning that game at like 2 a.m. But I think Arizona has turned out to be worse than at least all the media hype gave them in the preseason. It just feels like eventually this cocaine train runs out for the Red Raiders, but it hasn't yet. And another opportunity to just keep moving on down the line against Baylor this week, as you mentioned.
Yeah, the Big 12 is always fantastic to watch play out down the
So fun.
stretch. A lot of teams, it's backloaded too, right? Like we'll have Kansas State, Iowa State, I think the last week of the season. There's a lot of fun matchups. Does Utah get things figured out and throw their hat back into the ring, right? And if they do, I know they still have probably the best defense in the conference. Maybe, I don't know. Iowa State might have something to say about that, but
Yeah.
Utah is up there, and they could definitely throw some wrenches in some title contenders' plans down the stretch if they're not ready.
They certainly could. I think obviously inside the locker room, no one is going to do the national write-off. Well, oh, Cam Rising's done for the year. Well, then forget Utah even plays football. That's not going to happen for the rest of the Big 12 slate. But it does seem to take a little bit of an edge away from the Utes, right? And I think we all mentally discount them now that Isaac Wilson will be the starting quarterback. He's had his moments, he's had his flashes, but he's largely an unproven commodity. And while that defense is still pretty stout, you have to be able to score some points in the Big 12. This is not the Big 10 where everybody's running the football and 3 yards in a cloud of dust. At least the traditional Big 10. You've got to be able to spread the ball out, get it to wide receivers, playmakers in space, and put up 20, 24 points at a minimum. And we've seen Utah struggle with that at times this season. So I think I'm comfortably out on Utah. I wasn't really in on them to begin this season just because I always have questioned the health of Cam Rising. And, now there's the rumors that he could come back for an 8th season. I'm just
his 8th year of eligibility. He has it.
I
I did some research, Mitch. I texted you guys that earlier. Like, no way this gets approved. He already has it if he wants it.
He does.
It is on the table.
Get a job, Cam, please. Please.
Fire up that LinkedIn profile, buddy.
Join the labor force, my friend. It's not that bad out here.
Last thing, Hunter, that's a good joke. That's a great joke even, but no, please don't bring up those past feelings here. That's so true though. It does feel that way for Utah, just kind of a lot of high expectations, but crashing back to earth with injuries. Real quick, let's go through some G5 playoff odds real quick. Boise State's still the odds-on favorite to be the G5 playoff representative at plus 105. After that, you've kind of got a big conglomeration of teams. I was surprised to see Tulane as the number 2 team, at least on the betting market, at plus 650. Liberty also right there at plus 650 along with Memphis. And then UNLV is at plus 1,000. Army and Navy, if you're keeping track of the dream that at least one of them gets to the playoff, they're at plus 2,000 and plus 2,400 respectfully. So a lot to be played. Obviously, UNLV and Boise State will work itself out. We'll see those teams at least once in a couple of weeks and probably twice in the Mountain West Conference Championship game. To me, it feels like Boise's to lose. And if they run the table, I think they're going to be in even over an undefeated team from another power conference because they did challenge themselves out of conference by playing Oregon. And they have the Ashton Genty effect. And that's going to sell. It's going to be a big point in their favor when comparing just the eyeball test against some of these other teams.
I feel like the general college football fan base has bullied the 4-letter networks into covering Ashton Jeanty because you can tell they don't really want to do it. A lot of Heisman votes that are being publicized on Twitter right now, the talking heads, oh, well, it's still, X, Y, and Z. And then it's Ashton Jeanty. But he's not first still on a lot of ballots. And I don't know what else he needs to do. I mean, the man is on pace to literally run for over 2,500 yards this season. I don't care if it's not against SEC competition. What this guy is doing is inhuman. I mean, what he's able to do at the point of contact, ending lives in football careers by meeting linebackers and safeties in the A gap, it's just something that I haven't seen in college football maybe ever. And so for me, you combine that with the Gaudy numbers, what he's doing in a literal half of football. He's not even playing 4 quarters in most of these games. I don't see how it could be anybody else. I don't see how you can say that, oh, well, nobody's elite in college football this year, and it's kind of a bunch of teams that are on the same level. And then you have a literal superstar doing Megatron things, and you go, well, but the level of competition, it just, come on, man, believe in something.
Yeah, and he showed it didn't matter about competition when he played Oregon.
Exactly.
And still balled out against Oregon.
How did Ohio State run the ball against Oregon?
Not as good as he did.
Not well.
Yeah, and I know Oregon's improved since week 2, but the point still stands. He would be doing that against everybody, and I think he'd have a great chance to prove it. Imagine being the 5 seed, and you're thinking, all right, we got the G5 representative. That's great. And then Ashton Jeanty comes into your house for the first round of, it's going to be super fun to watch them down the stretch. But a lot to be figured out. I did want to point out, out of rhythm here, Tulane does have a really good defense that can help their cause, and they're only 2 losses. They already have 2 losses, but they're both to power conference teams. So again, challenging yourself out of conference. We as a show think that's what's going to hold Liberty back, even if they go undefeated. But challenging yourself out of conference could pay dividends for Tulane as well.
Well, and the Green Wave seem to have figured out the offensive side as well. So they truly look like they're rounding into form as a complete team. They're my preseason G5 playoff pick. Now, obviously, if I was to rewrite all of that, I would go back with Boise State, because if Boise State runs the table, they will have had to have beaten UNLV twice, which I think is no small feat. So I do, for my money, if I have to lay a few shekels on it, I would take Boise State, but I still like Tulane as that number 2 option. I think they're a more complete team than Memphis. And so right now I would still pick the Green Wave to beat the Tigers in that season finale and go to the American Championship.
Yeah, it's all going to depend on the service academies, though.
It is.
They still are undefeated and they don't play each other. So if no one in the American can figure out the option game, which it seems like that might be the case right now, Tulane might unfortunately find themselves in a 3-way tiebreak with a couple of undefeated teams. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Bring back divisions. I'm begging you. Get rid of these stupid tiebreaker rules. It's going to tie us in knots every single year.
Gracious him. How about that?